I felt that there was more a liberal orientation than was being seen by the NDP success. Mm-hmm. But now I think they're killing that. Like, whatever old liberal meant, I don't think it means that anymore. Is this the Liberal Party that you grew up with? No way.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everybody. This is a very special episode. We've been corresponding with this individual for at least a couple of months now, and we were able to have the honor of meeting him at a recent event in Stoney Creek, where we also met Andrew Scheer and Ned Curick for the first time. So without further ado, we present to you the former Member of Parliament for Hamilton Stoney Creek, as well as the former Mayor of Hamilton, Bob Bratina. Bob, welcome to Northern Perspective.
Well, thanks. I'm a big fan of the show. I think what you're doing is important, so I'm kind of honored to be here with you.
So I guess the first question, Bob, what is a former Liberal MP doing interested in the Conservative side of politics?
Well, I always, as a voter, voted for the best person in the riding. When it was obvious there was going to be a change, there was no Liberal representation in Hamilton. There was NDP, there was Conservative. I didn't run to take out a Conservative. I ran to win an NDP seat, which I did. Even in the sweep, the NDP were still strong. Chris Charlton had left the mountain, but Scott Duval came in and won fairly handily. So it was a bit of a challenge, but I was glad to be able to do that. Of course, we added a riding, Hamilton West, which Philomena Tassi won. So we did have Liberal representation. But that was what it was, the reason that I got into it. And I suppose we're going to talk about the reason that I got
out of it.
out of it. I'll just say briefly that Pierre Elliott Trudeau once said that away from Parliament Hill, MPs are nobodies. Well, I think his son has made it that when you're on Parliament Hill, you're a nobody.
He's definitely polling that way, that's for sure. So you decided to run for the Liberal Party in 2015. You met Justin Trudeau, just in was it in passing? Was it official?
Well, I had met him prior to his becoming the leader. He was in Hamilton, and I think he was looking for people such as mayors, etc., and I was the mayor, so we had a long chat about that. And, he's a presentable guy. He knows how to behave in public, and we had a good conversation. And then subsequently, I decided to make the move. But it was pretty quickly obvious that, not that I wasn't going anywhere, because remember, I had a 45-year career in broadcasting. Mm-hmm. I was in my 70s. I wasn't pining to be, an honorable or anything like that, but I wanted to get things done for Hamilton. And so that was the situation that I hoped to encounter. But one of the first things in one of the caucus meetings was a conversation about changing the standing orders, the behavior orders of the Parliament. Mm-hmm. And one of the things the Prime Minister told us was, yeah, and you know who made up those standing orders? Old white people. That's who made those standing orders. I said, well,
I kind of classify it.
Don't count too much in this one. And there were lots of other things. Even before the election started, they were talking about returning home postal service. And it was ridiculous because we knew, all the mayors knew in Ontario and Canada, I guess, that we were finding locations for the super boxes and so on. And so to pander for any possible vote, okay, we're going to get the mailman to bring your letter up to the mailbox. A, how many people are in that situation now because we've changed it so much? And B, what about rural? What about those mile-long lanes?
Yeah.
So it just, a lot of that stuff said, well, why are you doing that? You want to change from what's been, focus on the things that are important to people. But it seemed that every little thing that might get a vote was considered.
And so you served your first 4 years in Parliament. At what point really did it hit you that, you know what, I can't continue this?
Well, several things along the way meant a declining interest in the way things were going. And once again, it's early in the game because, for instance, we had the last election first past the post.
Yeah.
So we're in a caucus meeting, and in 1 hour, we're told Karina Gould is going to go out and announce her new mandate letter that we're not doing electoral reform. Well, there was a big buzz among all of us, like, well, why do we have to abandon it? Put it on the back burner, you know, let's see what can happen year after the next year. But the assumption was that the Liberals might win a minority government, but in fact they won a majority government. And that was the worst thing. That blew out electoral reform. Oh, who needs that?
Yeah.
You know, and it also made the group very arrogant because there were a lot of young, new people in politics who all of a sudden, and this is the worst thing about politics, people think they're more important than they really are. Mm-hmm. You're there to do a job. But a lot of folks need to enhance their sense of self-worth and their ego and so on. I was lucky because people sort of knew who I was after all those years doing Tiger Cats and stuff like that. So that wasn't one of my things. So I don't begrudge them that, but it's a little obvious. And I worked in a field that was very egotistical. You know, every announcer thought they were better than the other announcer. So I could see it, and I wasn't impressed by it.
Is it? Do you think it's that way for? I'm not going to say all politicians, but most politicians, like they get elected and then they arrive in Ottawa and they have staff and they have an office and all. Like, is it difficult not to succumb to that?
Of course not. It's because you're in focus. And I can recall, you know, when I first drove my wife up to Ottawa after I'd been elected, and as you drive up to the Parliament buildings, especially the old center block, which is being renovated. Wow, this is, you know, like, it's like Maple Leaf Gardens was in the old days, and you're part of it. But then you start strutting around with your long black coat and your briefcase and the important look on your face, and nobody really cares. But no, it does get to you, and you should be able to, all of us, including the Prime Minister, grow into the importance of the job. But in our case, there was a hermetically sealed PMO office, and we didn't very often have much of an impact. Two early things happened. One was the Bill Morneau's ethical problems.
Yes.
And that raised a lot of conversation within our group. Newly elected people were now worried a year in or so, whenever it was fairly early. Oh, this could affect my re-election chances. And I actually told the Hill Times, forget that, just stick to your... I didn't think that Bill Morneau's ethics were going to wipe out the party or, you know, cause you to lose in Durham or, you know, some riding somewhere. And so I said that, and the Katie Telford and the group actually circled it. They all read the Hill Times, and highlighted that an MP was saying, just stick to your own stuff. But then the next one was the attestation, with the summer jobs, where you had to check boxes that your moral code didn't include, you know, protesting outside abortion clinics and stuff like that.
And was that the We Charity scandal?
Yeah, no, that wasn't We Charity yet.
Not yet. Oh, no. Another one.
No, that was the attestation for Canada summer jobs. We all submitted potential job sites, and for instance, a local restaurant had a need for 40 students for the summer, which they actually got. But if, for instance, one of the attestations was completely against the Roman Catholic Church because it had with regard to birth rights. And so in the discussions we had, I remember talking to Patty Haydu about it, and she was saying, well, what about our base, our different base people that she mentioned? And I said, well, my base, a lot of it is the Roman Catholic Church in Hamilton East Stony Creek.
Yeah.
And so they adjusted, they did it for 1 year, and then they adjusted it for the next year to get away from that idea that particularly offended Roman Catholic people, but also the Muslim community. There were lots of people who were offended by that. So these two things raised problems within the caucus that actually were discussed. But if you spoke too harshly against, and I remember two individuals in particular, the Prime Minister would just glare at them. And you knew, like, this is not a topic that he wants to, go into too deeply. But so all along, there are little things happening. As you go along, you have to make, life's not perfect for anybody. But in my case, it got to the point where finally, after this situation with the LRT funding came up, and a third of the LRT was in my riding. And I know that I talk to so many, every time I see 5 people together in a Hortons or something, hey, what do you think about this LRT? Are you kidding? Waste of money. Of course, there are some people who think it's good. But I found, I'm sure I spoke to hundreds of people, and that's the response I got. So then, all of a sudden, Catherine McKenna announces, and I think Philomena Tassi, there was a kind of a joint announcement that we're putting $1.7 billion into the Hamilton LRT. And so I said, and at that time, the Prime Minister was saying about how he was out consulting with Canadians. Well, you didn't consult with your member of Parliament who represents 100,000 Canadians, most of whom seem to be against what you just said. So it wasn't so much that they did it, it's how they did it. Because I said, I can't, in my statement, and I sent a letter to the entire Liberal caucus, how do I go to the door and defend that? Nobody talked to me about it and said, Bob, I know you think this, but we think that, and what about my complaints? Well, blah, blah, blah. And then, okay, we move on. The only thing that I've really felt badly about, in retrospect, was that I didn't stay on, not for the pension, and I wouldn't have continued on, because I didn't want somebody to hang that over me that, well, you just stayed on because you wanted to get the pension.
Right.
But what I would have wanted to stay on is that my office in the Valor building on O'Connor and Sparks,
yep,
right where the convoy was. Mm-hmm. And I would have gladly wandered around. I knew people from Hamilton who were there. What's your story? But this, they're waving swastikas and all this crazy rhetoric that was coming out of the Prime Minister's office. It was really offensive. So had I stayed over, I could have not crossed the floor yet, because I did talk to Aaron O'Toole about that. But what I think I could have done is sat as an independent, because I was elected with the help of all the Liberal volunteers.
Right.
So I don't think it would be fair to them for me to cross the floor. But it would be fair to say I'll sit in as an independent, and issues that come up, if I agree, from the Liberal perspective, I can stand and vote for them. Mm-hmm. But I can't, in all honesty and on principle, accept what was done without any consultation. However, in retrospect, as I said, we've got the pension problem that you've been speaking about so often with regard to Jagmeet Singh, the NDP leader.
Do you, and the SNC-Lavalin affair happened during 2019. Was that?
Did it ever? Yeah.
Yeah. What was your reaction as that was unfolding?
Well, it was pretty obvious that SNC-Lavalin held a special place in the PMO.
Yeah.
And a lot of things, even the LRT thing, like who's lobbying? There's somebody's helping the decision along.
Yeah.
And for instance, SNC-Lavalin is a major component of any LRT project that I'm aware of in and around Ontario, for sure, and others. So that was, and I got along great with Jody Wilson-Raybould. I told her, I was thinking of sitting with an independent when she was sitting as an independent. We could have had some great chats together while those other people were going on with their business. But it was disturbing for the obvious reasons that obviously there's a strong lobby. How strong that it cost the clerk of the Privy Council his job, Michael
Warnick. Yep.
Yeah. And by the way, John Hannaford, who was the head of the Privy Council, the clerk of the Privy Council now, has very extensive experience in dealing as deputy minister, and he's got a very interesting CV. And he could have been someone who would give good advice to the Prime Minister. I think the complete collapse, in my estimation of what was going on with the Krista Freeland story, was where's Telford and where's Butts?
Yeah.
I don't believe that he sat in the room alone and said, you know what, I'm just going to tell her. He had to have that discussion. So, and then I heard somebody talked him out of it, in terms of quitting.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it seems that the culprit might have been Mark Miller, who was very close to the Prime Minister. But so there are some people sort of within that realm. Dominic LeBlanc would be another one. The fact that somehow they came to that conclusion that that's what they would do with regard to Krista Freeland was proof enough that they've got to go. They just don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, and what we've heard is the main person to be kind of convincing Trudeau to stay, because there was this planned announcement in the House of Commons last, 2 Mondays ago now, that he was going to come in, he was going to announce his resignation, but I guess allegedly Katie Telford convinced him not to because who knows why, right? But there's so much chaos going on within Ottawa, within the Prime Minister's inner circle, that it's hard to see exactly what's going to happen and where it is.
Well, Katie Telford, if that's the advice that she gave him, stay on. What about the advice regarding Krista Freeland?
Right.
That wasn't very good advice.
No.
And I feel really sorry for his children.
Yeah.
Because they're bearing a lot of the... He mentioned that, my daughter has that last name, whatever he said with regard to the flags. And I agree, but he's dragging them through a lot of difficulty that it's going to play. I think, for instance, and I haven't seen too much discussion on this, but he didn't have a very good childhood.
No.
He was 5 years old, I think, when they split. And so Pierre got custody, and they lived at 24 Sussex. And when Justin became Prime Minister, he didn't want to live in 24 Sussex. And I think it was more than just moldy wood.
Yeah, I was going to say it's fallen into disrepair.
Well,
yeah.
But to Bob's point, I think the main reason...
more than memories.
Yeah, there's a lot of bad memories probably from that.
Well, I think so. And maybe he doesn't like old men because his father was in his 50s, when everything fell apart. And then he had his own Pierre Trudeau little narrative going on with who was sneaking in the door at night, So it wasn't good. And so often the Prime Minister prefaces statements with, we know, I know. Well, I don't think you really know, because I'm not sure whether you ever went to a hockey game. Because if you went to hockey games, you would understand the convoy protesters a little better than the way it came across. 100%. Or a football game, because his father I remember he kicked the football off on, I think, the 67 Grey Cup. So at least he had a sense of taking part in it. In Justin's case, it was boxing, which is not something people watch it, but they don't do it.
It's a solo sport too.
Yeah, it's not a team sport. That's right.
So, yeah, exactly. So, and then to box an Indigenous person in view of subsequent events, it's a very strange series of events in his life that lead to him being a prime minister who claims to know Canadians, but I don't think he really does.
Yeah, anything but. And there's a lot of perception among Canadians that dislike Trudeau, that he's a dictator, that he's rules
With an iron fist.
Yeah, and unilaterally. In your time with him, is he a dictator? Is he a dictator? Did he feel like a dictator?
I don't think he thinks he's a dictator. I just think he knows better than everybody else. And so that's what we're going to do, because this is the right thing to do, because I know. Because we know. I know. They always know. How come you're below 20% approval rating? One of the worst things happened in this concatenation, I love that word, I wanted to get it into the discussion of events, was one of the town halls. You don't think he's going to have any more town halls? I don't think so.
No.
But I think it was in Edmonton, and I think it was an oil field worker who was discussing his layoff and what we were going to do. And the answer that Justin gave to him was, well, hang in there. Now, how do you, as a family with kids in school and chances of getting a job in your field are possible? Because I know people who left Hamilton to go work in the oil fields. Well, once you're laid off, you're 100 miles away from the next job.
Yeah.
So maybe 500 miles away. There's a lot of people from Newfoundland in Fort McMurray and so on who had to face that. So how do you tell somebody to hang in there? And that tells me you don't really get it.
Well, and that's what we see, I think, from across Trudeau's inner circle, especially Chrystia Freeland, the way she, I'll use in quotes, communicates to people. And, she's tried to distance herself from Trudeau during this last bit, but Canadians have long memories. They've seen, who stood up and announced the freezing of the bank accounts. Canadians, remember all of the ways that she's talked down to Canadians. Oh, well, we understand. Well, if you have to say we understand, then you obviously don't understand.
Well, I can speak to that point, because if she hadn't had, was it a Zoom call?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing was going to change, and she would continue on, she would have presented the budget speech.
Yep.
But I have to say, in her defense, as a member of Parliament, I always kind of bragged about this to people. Look, I don't waste anybody's time. So many people in Caucus, they all want to blab on, and they're always, trying to make themselves bigger than they are. And I don't do that because I don't need it. I just want to make sure things get done. And I'll give you a good example. There was a hurricane in St. Martin's, and there's a school there where Canadians and American kids, young people can take, I think, pre-med. There's a university in that area. So there was a hurricane, and they were stranded. And one of the people who puts the student applications together is from Stony Creek. And she called me up very upset, and she said, the Americans have already landed a plane in there, Air Force plane, and evacuated the American kids. What about the Canadians? I said, well, that's a good question, and I'm going to find out for you. So I sent an email to Chrystia Freeland, and within 15 or 20 minutes, I got a response. Oh, I wasn't aware of this. Sorry about this. And I'll see that one of her staffers gets on it. So that was in midday of the first day. The morning of the second day, the lady calls me up again and says, well, what's going on? I said, well, let me find out, And so I contacted the staffer, copied Chrystia Freeland. Sunwing flight is landing this afternoon at 1:30. And I could give you a couple more examples, but in terms of, if she felt that there was an issue, she needed to deal with it. She dealt with it right away. And part of that might be because I think François-Philippe Champagne is somewhat like that as well. I had a few similar things, and he was fairly quick to get back. I'm not going to say that was just because, but they were upwardly mobile. They're perhaps looking at being a prime minister. In fact, one ex-MP got in touch with me, and the word was that he was probably considering looking to run for prime minister, and he would be a very good candidate. But anyway, the point is that perhaps the ones who are like that are being better communicators internally with the MPs to show that you can rely on them. As far as the criticisms of Ms. Freeland, people can accept them for what they are, because she's pretty, I would not say full of herself, but very self-confident. And I think that comes across in
a negative way.
Yeah, in the way she communicates. And as a broadcaster of 45 years, would somebody please speak to the Prime Minister about that nasal delivery that he has? He's a drama guy, for goodness sake. And I think Krista too could work a little bit on verbal presentation. And when we were in radio, the thing that any announcer cringed at was having to go to the program director and listen to an air check of your show. But that's what you need, And I'm sure you guys watch your own show.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, and you correct yourself. I can see all along. How long have you been doing this now?
About 2 years.
Yeah, and there's obviously no comparison from the first couple of years to.
Thank goodness.
No,
Yeah, definitely not.
No, but I mean, you went through a lot just to get here, so which I think most of your followers appreciate.
Thank you.
Well, and it's almost unfortunate that we've had to get involved, and that's the thing, right? If everything was going well, we probably would never have started the channel. And
but politics isn't a spectator sport, as we've learned.
Yeah.
You got to get involved.
So we wanted to.
Or uninvolved, as I did.
Oh, there you go. Well, but I think that's a lot of Canadians have lost faith in politics. They've lost faith in the government. They've lost faith in politicians because they don't seem to believe that many of them still have integrity, and I think that's one of the problems. But the good news is that there's people like yourselves that do have integrity, that you can say, you know what, I ran for this party, this isn't aligning with what I signed up for, and I'm not going to be a part of it. And that's one of the questions that we've challenged some of the Conservative MPs, like, what if the Conservative government ends up in a similar situation? Are you going to stand up and say something about that? So,
well, I think you've seen the Conservatives, though, actually stand up and say things, because they had 3 leaders.
Very true.
Right.
And I actually was always chatting with my colleagues either on either side of the house. And I said to one of the Conservatives, why are you guys airing your laundry in public with the Aaron O'Toole thing? Because that can all be dealt with. But why would you do it publicly? Because the public is not interested in your fights.
Your squabbles, yeah.
They're interested in how their own lives are. They forget about people. They forget that everyone has an issue. Even if you're fairly well off and organized, there's things that you grumble about. But some people are in serious trouble with their mortgages, with interest rates, with the education system, with Zoom classes, with post-COVID. It's still, showing its ugly face. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of issues for people. And we don't want to hear, we shouldn't be hearing about the kind of things that the Liberals have led themselves to do. And I've said to people, and I've seen them come by the media scrums and say, oh, I'm 100%, oh, we're unified. That's not what they said to me over a cold one on Spark Street 3 years ago.
Yeah, and that's the problem. It is transparent to many Canadians.
Yeah.
And so when they come out and say that, it's just one more lie, and that's the problem. And
It is a lie.
Yeah.
Because one of them, very prominent guy, is this the party that your family, they're old stock, if I can use that term, liberals, is this the Liberal Party that you grew up with? No way. But that was a long time ago, and it's still going on. And so I would say the same thing. Hamilton, to me, when I was growing up, was actually a liberal city. When you think of John Monroe and Sheila Copps and Joe Macaluso, and even provincially, it goes back to Tom Ross and Vic Copps and, people like that. So I always thought, in running again, as I did for Hamilton East Stony Creek, because I grew up in Hamilton East. So Stony Creek, you're not from Stony Creek. Yeah, but I'm from Hamilton East. So the point was, I felt that there was more a liberal orientation than was being seen by the NDP success. Mm-hmm. But now I think they're killing that. Like, whatever old liberal meant, I don't think it means that anymore.
Yeah, and you've seen, current members like Anthony Housefather come out and who's intends to run again. Blaine Higgs, who isn't running again, but he's been vocal and saying that we need to get the Liberal Party back to a center-left position, because I think to most Canadians, they are even further left than the NDP now, which is I think the challenge that the NDP has had, because you have all of these really far left policies that have just been implemented and rammed down people's throats, and it's not that center left kind of position of sanity there. So I think that's where a lot of liberal voters are now kind of struggling with. Like, they don't recognize this party anymore as the party they grew up with, to your point. So
or the NDP, I think, because to me, when they were having that vote of greatest Canadian, I put Tommy Douglas up there somewhere. Jagmeet Singh's no Tommy Douglas.
No, he's not.
Well, and you even hear that. Like, you even hear people who would never vote NDP, but they would say, but I respected Jack Layton for the leader that he was. And everyone seems to think that, Jagmeet, like, what would Jack Layton and or Tommy Douglas say about Jagmeet's, quote unquote leadership of the NDP? They would be rolling over.
I think Tom Mulcair is kind of beating around that bush too, because it sounds to me a lot of his commentary leans toward supporting the liberal approach, and he must still feel badly about doing the second best election ever for the NDP and then getting thrown out.
And now you see they're scraping the bottom of the barrel for any seat that they can. So, and he must be looking at this and like, wait a minute, I was ousted for this? Like, I can't imagine. And Tom Mulcair, he was a decent leader of the NDP. So,
it was pretty good in the House. I think he was very effective in the House question period, as an example. Earlier in the early days, watching Pierre Poilievre, I thought he was a little extreme on the harsh side, but I don't think at those early days he was projecting himself. Maybe he was into a prime ministerial position, but I think as it dawned on him and the party that he could be the next Prime Minister of Canada, I think that's guided him in the way he presents himself a lot differently. But I think he's amazing. The way he can collect facts and keep things straight and almost anticipate every question, no matter how outlandish it was. I mean, there's no pause and, word salad words until he gets an idea. He's there right away. So I'm pretty impressed with him.
And do you think he'll do everything he says he's going to do, or at least he'll try?
Pierre. That he'll be the next prime minister?
What do you think he'll? So everything that he's talked about, I'm gonna axe the tax, I'm gonna fix the budget, I'm gonna reverse it. Do you believe him when he says he'll do all these things?
I do. Yeah. I mean, he said them so often, you can't hide away from them anymore. I almost think because the other side in the debate said, oh, slogan, slogan, slogan. Well, people like slogans. They put them on their bumpers. They're easy to remember.
Yep.
And I would say stick to that. Because watching Donald Trump, border, economy, yeah. What about the Panama Canal? Like, forget the Panama Canal. Like, what I think Americans want to hear is what basically they were saying. And I think Canadians want to hear that too from Pierre Poilievre, to really emphasize those things. Stephen Harper did a great change from his Reform Party days. He focused in on the things that meant most to Canadians by the time he got in, and frankly, they got off the track a little bit, but they still didn't get destroyed. They didn't get wiped out when they lost the election. However, the Liberals are facing destruction, party status for sure. I mean,
yeah, the latest polls, they're now in third place behind the Bloc, and they're just going further and further downhill. So,
yeah, but to your point, I think and I hope that Mr. Poilievre sticks to the messaging, and I have no reason to believe he won't. And I've been with him in informal settings, and he looks you in the eye. He doesn't stare off somewhere else. It's. I think a lot of them. I know a lot of people at the door. Oh, I just don't like him. Well, you haven't thought enough about him and what he's saying.
Well, I think they've never met him. Like, my dad was the same way, I think, until we started getting involved in politics, and we were kind of able to bring my parents out to some of these events and just talk to them like, hey, I've met Pierre a few times. He's a good guy. Like, he looks you in the eyes and he tells you the truth. He doesn't lie to you.
Well,
no.
the thing that I think impressed me most about the first time we met Pierre is he listened.
He does.
And so that really impressed me. And I tell the story often. You may have heard us talk about it, but at the first rally we were at, we were near the end, but there was a gentleman, a couple of people ahead of us, stocky, older gentleman, and couldn't tell what he was saying to Pierre, but Pierre was just very patient with him, and listened to what he said. And then Pierre just like gave this guy a big bear hug. And I could see what Pierre was saying to him. He said, it's going to be okay. So, like, you can't fake that.
No, I can never imagine Justin Trudeau doing that.
No.
No, and door to door is it's so important to meet people directly, because I had people, they have an image of you based on whatever you were on the radio or politics or whatever the media writes about you.
Right.
And I remember someone telling me about another person. Yeah, he met you the other day. You're completely different than what he thought. Because we're probably talking about football, or whatever it is. You really need to get to know people. And I don't think people really got to understand what Justin Trudeau was all about, because of the way he was presenting himself was very user-friendly for a lot of the going. But when push comes to shove, he doesn't look that good, does he? And once again, I really feel badly for his family, because they're going to bear a brunt of a lot of what's going on now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, especially with the a lot of the slogans and the flags and stuff like that. They didn't ask to be born as a Trudeau.
But at the same time, Justin doesn't really try to protect them from the social media. He'll flaunt them out on his Instagram.
No, and he'll take pictures of them. But it's beyond me.
Taylor Swift concert.
Yeah,
friendship thing.
Yeah, our audience knows we have a son. He exists. We just don't show him because we want to respect his privacy.
Well, and right after the split with Sophie, he said, please respect her privacy. But in the very next post, he's like, here's a picture of my son. We're going to a movie. Like, why are you doing that?
Yeah.
It just...
Yeah, and then they went on vacation together, and it's really difficult to have a political principle and watch all this stuff going on. And once again, maybe I'm too thin-skinned, but at one point I said, I can't do this anymore. And yeah, there's a nice pension if I just stick around for a little longer, but I can't bring myself to do that. And I'm not trying to sound like a hero. It's just that it's got to change. And if there are lots of people along my way of thinking in that group who are still saying, well, maybe not now, because I think, was it 50 or 60? There's a number now that's growing. But a lot of them were there when I left.
Well, and they're still there now, right? So they've decided to continue to support these policies, and that is going to be their legacy. They can try to turn around now and say, oh, well, I'm against Justin Trudeau. Well, it's obvious to Canadians that you're only against Justin Trudeau when it stops serving your interests. So that's the
I'm
challenge.
sorry, Nathaniel Erskine Smith, because I talked to him not that long ago, and he was ready to leave. Yep, I'm glad I'm going. I said, look, Nate, I'm glad I'm out of it because this and that. He said, yeah, me too. I won't be running again. Oh, it's going to be the honorable. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. And you're going to stay on now. Well, good luck on that, although he's in a pretty safe Liberal seat. I don't hate the guy, but do you have any principles at all?
And that's it, right? And that's what Canadians are craving. Like they want to trust their government. They want to be able to believe that there's people in there with integrity. So that's where we say we're hopeful for the Conservatives once they get in. But
we'll be keeping an eye on them.
But we also say to them, like, take good care of the trust and the hope that Canadians have given you, because if you abuse that, you will never get it back. So
right.
Anyway, thanks so much for coming on the show here, Bob. It's
a pleasure. I really enjoyed it, and I like your dogs. They were
well, the one we have left.
Yeah, Finnick. Yep, he's a friendly guy.
Yeah, he is. Yeah. Well, thanks so much. It was great to be here.